I'm Lieutenant Colonel Dick Merritt, United States Marine Corps retired, working with the Roaring Fork Veterans History Project. It's 16 November 2012. We're in the Aspen GrassRoots television studio, Aspen, Colorado, doing this interview. Today we're interviewing Charlie Paterson. He was born on 7 July 1929 in Vienna, Austria. And the cameramen are Jackie Schaefer and Richard Lamping today. And we are sponsored by the Roaring Fork Veterans History Project in association with the Library of Congress and the Aspen Historical Society. And I'm going to start out welcoming you, Charlie.
Good, Dick.
Good to have you here with us today.
Thank you.
Winter's coming, and we're going to talk about winter a little bit today. That's how we got here. So your military background, can you tell us the years you served in the military and where you served?
Okay, 1954
yeah.
to 1956. I was in the Mountain Cold Weather Training Command, U.S. Army, and started at Fort Ord, basic training, but finally got into the Mountain Cold Weather, which was not so easy to get into because they were looking for very specialized people who were ski instructors or mountaineers, that sort of thing. That was quite important for them. So you had to have letters of reference. And originally, after basic training, they had me scheduled for cook school.
Cook school, Charlie.
So, because I have a damaged eardrum, so they weren't going to put me in the infantry. But then the letters finally came through that I'd written to Camp Hale, to Colonel at Camp Hale, and they immediately brought me into the training over there.
Over at Camp Hale, just over the hill here, where the
over the hill
10th Mountain Division had been. And what was your rank in the Army?
I was a private. I went in as a private and came out as a corporal.
Very good. Very good.
So,
did you do any other work outside of Camp Hale or any training, any other base?
well, I was a ski instructor already in Aspen. Starting in 1952, I was in the ski school, but I didn't have any mountaineering experience, other than that I was pretty athletic, and I was very happy to learn the mountain training that I could teach then to other people.
And that would be rappelling from rocks in the summertime?
Well, you know, our mission was, in the summer, was rescue and rappelling, of course, and techniques of climbing, and how to build suspension traverses out of, if you had to cross a canyon and bring litters across, or bring litters down a sheer face of an injured infantry person or mountain climber for that matter. And we went through pretty rigorous training, and we had civilians who trained us. And then we were trained to be trainers for other trainers who then went to their outfits and taught the technique. And the same thing in skiing.
Well, that's very similar. I was an instructor in the Marine Corps Mountain Warfare Training Center in Bridgeport, Pickle Meadows, California. And today we're sending battalions of Marines up there in a high altitude in the Sierras to acclimatize and train, and then going to Afghanistan. So the mission is still carrying on, and Fort Drum, New York is now the headquarters of the 10th Mountain Division. So there's some very close ties that are still going on. Well, let's go back a little bit, Charlie, to you have a really interesting story on how you got to Camp Hale. And I mentioned you were born in 1929 in Vienna, Austria. And then you come from a family of architects, and you yourself have been trained. And one of the famous architects at the time was Adolf Loos in the Vienna enclave. Could you mention who he was in relation to you?
Well, he was not a blood relation. He was a relation. He was my uncle by marriage. He married my Aunt Claire Beck, who was the younger sister of my mother. And there were only 3 children in the family. And she was much younger than he was. She was his 3rd wife, and pretty much, actually, she married him when I was born.
Oh.
The same month I was born, in 1929, and the marriage lasted about 3 years. About 1933, he died, actually. So it was a short marriage, but she was a great fan of Adolf Loos because of my grandfather. And so she had originally met him when she was only 17 years old, because Loos came to my grandfather's apartment, which he was redoing. Loos was hired to redo my grandfather's apartment in Pilsen. And it's a funny story, because he was in the living room, and my Aunt Claire walked in. She was 17 years old, and she saw this gentleman in a brown suit, and she said, before she talked to him, she heard him say, "This picture on the wall has got to go. It's terrible." And just then my aunt walked in and said, "Well, who are you?" And he said, "I'm Adolf Loos." And she said, "Well, I painted that picture."
Oh my gosh.
And he said, "Oh, that picture's going to stay."
Yeah, that's going to stay.
So, but then nothing happened until she was in her 20s, and she was in Paris, and he was with a lot of these artists in Paris, and so she was also, and my grandparents called her a bohemian.
A bohemian, oh yeah, the Paris quarter.
So she came in with this group and met him and became a great admirer of his.
I see.
And so one day he said, "Will you help me do my secretarial work, you know?" And so she said, "Sure, I have time." And so she started as his secretary, and of course he married her soon thereafter.
What a story. Well, he was in the Vienna enclave, and I understand you're going back to Vienna for a presentation, actually to be honored. Could you explain a little bit about your trip to Vienna that's coming up?
Right after Thanksgiving this year, we were asked to come back to Vienna because they're having, at the Wien Museum, which is the Vienna Museum, they're having a show about a little area, a little town, or you might call a little enclave is the right word, I suppose, of a housing development that was built by the city of Vienna in the 30s, 1930s. And it was called the Workmansiedlung, and it was an experiment in housing. So they turned around and they invited 70 different architects, each to build a house there. And we were one of the original owners in one of these houses, which was designed not by Loos. Loos's house was only a few doors down from where we were, but it was designed by one of his pupils. And that was Jacques Groag. Anyway, We moved in 1932. And we were in Vienna last year, and we were talking to these people at the museum. And when they found out my connection with loss, which they knew, that's why they were talking to us, they found out that I'm the only survivor left who lived in that in that Workmansiedlung originally in 1932 to 1938. When the Anschluss came along and Hitler took over Austria. So they were very interested in what happened to some child like me who had to leave Austria and what became of his life. So now they asked us to do a video, which Greg Postman did a beautiful job on this video. And we sent it back, and they have it playing for 19 minutes with German subtitles of me talking about our life at the Workmansiedlung when I was a little, I was there from 3 years old to 9 years old.
See, that's so, your life has some parallels too. In that you went into architecture and were influenced by Frank Lloyd Wright. We'll get to that a little bit. And so that's how this thing got going. And then, in 1938, before 1938, I understand your father had served in, was it the Austro-German army and captured by the Russians? What was
that? He was an officer in the Austrian Hunter Battalion.
World War I.
World War I.
Yeah.
Before the war. And first he was a cadet, but he was an officer. And the Hunter Battalion was like the mountain troops that we had here. And that's quite interesting because he started skiing in Vienna, in Austria in 1910 when skiing came down from Scandinavia. So he was very interested in sports and very athletic. So at any rate, he was captured on the Russian front right at the very beginning of the war in Galicia. And he spent 5 years in Siberia as a result of this capture and ended up in Vladivostok in a camp run by the Japanese, who were allies of the Russians. So the American expeditionary forces were also there at the end of the war, when the war was
1918.
over. Exactly right. So eventually he escaped and was the first Viennese back from Siberia from that period. After 5 years, there were people who came back later, but they didn't know what to do with them. They had all these prisoners at the end of the war, and they had no transportation. They had no place to put them. They had nothing planned, All of a sudden, there were all these prisoners that they had to get back to their countries. And they were Italian, and they were all kind of different Czechoslovakians, Austrians, all different nationalities.
It's a miracle he survived. You hear about the stalags in
yeah, he had a very
Russia.
good constitution. He lived till he was 89.
89.
Yep.
Well, he got back then to Vienna. Came back ultimately to Vienna.
He came back, and of course Austria was in a depression after the war. There were no jobs. It was very hard for everybody, and he was, I think, post-traumatic stress because he was very depressed for a couple of years. But then he went back to work with our family who had textile factories, and so he became manager of the Viennese house of Hermann Pollack and Sons, HPS, and he managed their office in Vienna. And later, then he was sent to the Far East to be their representative.
I see.
In the Near East and the Far East.
Textiles. Well, things were then picking up and going fairly good until Kristallnacht in 1938. That's when your life changed. How did that happen in Vienna? What do you remember of that 1938 when the Germans came into Vienna?
Well, you know, I was only 9 years old, and I knew what was going on, but didn't have much say in what was happening. And my father was desperate in getting us out of Austria and out of Europe. In the meantime, my mother had died, and there was just my sister and I. She was 2 years older than I was. She was 12 and or 11 and a half, and I was 9. And so he arranged for us somehow to get papers after the Anschluss to go to Czechoslovakia. And we stayed in Pilsen with my grandmother. My maternal grandmother was living in Pilsen. My grandfather had already died in 1935. So we were there for about 9 months. And we went to a school for a while until things got bad again. And the Germans took over Czechoslovakia. In the meantime, to make this story not too long, in the meantime, he had gone on to Paris. And he flew to Paris, and he was trying to pull us out of Czechoslovakia from Paris, because he knew that what the Germans were going to eventually march throughout Europe. He was a military man. He had a good understanding of military plans, more or less. And he spoke about 5 languages. So he spoke French like a Frenchman, and he spoke Russian and some Italian as a result of all the things that had been going on over all the years. Anyway, he got us out of Czechoslovakia, but only my sister and I, after Czechoslovakia was occupied. So I write all that in the book that I've written. And it ended up in a pretty good story.
What was your father's name?
His name was Steve Schanzer. It was Stefan Schanzer originally, and of course he changed it to Steve and anglicized it a little bit by taking the C out of the Schanzer, S-C-H. He made S-H-A-N-Z-E-R. As he said, I want to take the German out. So he took out the C.
Well, parallel, I talked to my good friend Kurt Bresnitz the other day, and he mentions, and we'll get to this, that your father, Steve, and he were great friends here in Aspen. And of course, Kurt himself escaped the Holocaust in 1938 from Vienna. So it's what a bringing together of people. It's amazing how people survived. And your father, how did he get to the States after he got out of away from the Germans in Paris?
Well, first of all, we lived in Paris about 9 months. And then he arranged for my sister and I to be adopted in Australia. So eventually he put us on a ship to go to Australia, which happened to be the last English ship that even touched the shores of France. It was a month before the fall of France. It was pretty close, 1940.
Close. Very close.
And he couldn't get out. So we didn't know if we'd ever see him again. So off we went to Australia, and he joined the French army, more or less. And first as a driver, and then he ended up in a camp in Audienne, which is in northern part of France. And he was caught in this camp. The Germans came, took over the camp, and they were separating, and you know, we were Jewish. That's why we had to leave. and they were separating the Jews from the Christians. And he knew what was coming already. So they set up a machine gun in the middle of the camp, and they had 2 German soldiers who were manning this machine gun. And he looked over and he saw next to a building over a few hundred yards away a table against a brick wall. This wall was about 10 foot tall. And he saw people going over this wall when the Germans weren't looking. Mm-hmm. And so he waited for an opportunity when they weren't busy with something else. And he took off, boom, over the wall, and he was gone. So now he spent a whole month walking and bicycling through occupied France, ended up in Portugal, went over the Pyrenees, and he had to go, he walked over the Pyrenees. He tried 3 times, he made it the 3rd time. And he had a visa that was a Chinese visa, a Czechoslovakian visa, an Austrian visa. He had about 5 different kind of visas, but the visas expired in 1 month that he could exit. He didn't have an exit visa to leave France, but he had a visa to go into Spain. Mm-hmm. So he was able to go through Spain on this visa, which expired within a week that he was in Spain, and got into Portugal. So then he was in Portugal and ended up teaching English to all the refugees that ended up in Portugal in 1940. And then he was applied for papers to come to the United States, and he finally found there was a relative here in Canada who sponsored him, and he had to have $5,000. He had nothing. And so he put $5,000, that's a lot of money in that 1940, in the bank for him, so Steve could emigrate to the United States.
So he ultimately wound up in the United States, and you're in Australia.
That's
and,
right.
What city was that in Australia?
We lived in Brisbane.
Brisbane.
On the East Coast.
And so you took the family name Paterson then?
Yes. I was adopted by the Patersons, and when we eventually left Australia 8 years later, we decided to keep the name as a thank you, you know, because they really saved our life. And also Steve's life, because he couldn't have gone through France with 2 little kids the way he did, sleeping in haylofts and in farmyards and out on the meadows and who knows what, you know.
Well, then as a young boy and young man, what were you doing in Brisbane?
Well, I was in school.
In school?
Yeah. I was in school.
Do you
Most
have
of the time.
any contact with the Paterson family today?
Well, I lost contact after I left for various reasons. First of all, they never wrote letters to anybody. And so my letters that I wrote them were never answered. So I lost contact for many years until our good friends, the O'Danes. You remember Dr.
O'Dane,
Robert
sure.
O'Dane?
Well,
He was the orthopedic surgeon here. Right. He and his wife went to Australia, and they took it on themselves to call every Paterson in Brisbane.
with 1 T.
With 1 T. Well, there are a lot of them over there with 1 T.
Yeah.
You know, it's different over there. It's 1 T,
Yeah.
2 T's over here.
Yeah.
And finally they found a Paterson in Sydney. And sure enough, it was the Patersons.
Oh my gosh.
And he contacted the granddaughter of the Patersons. And her name by that time was Katie Connolly. Katie Connolly was about 17 years old, and so we reconnected.
I see.
And then the following year, Katie came to Aspen
Oh my God.
on a trip that they were going through Europe and America, and she stayed with us about a month and worked for me at my lodge.
Mm.
And then came back 2 years later again and married an Aspen guy and took him back to Australia.
Oh my gosh. What a connection.
So
the
now
Aspen connection. Well, you know, the theme of this whole interview is the 4 A's, Austria, Australia, America, and Aspen.
Right.
That's what we're covering today here. So anyway, you came to the United States in what year, and where did you go at that time?
We came over in 1949, my sister and I, and we reconnected with Steve, who we had lost for a while.
Your father.
Yep. And he was over here, and so we came over and joined him in New York.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in New York I went back to high school and graduated from high school and started college. And then one winter, well, actually,
What were you studying in college?
engineering.
Engineering, okay.
Right. At City College of New York. I didn't like it very much. It was too dry for me. You know, I was more interested in architecture, which is what I destined to become. But at that time, I was still not sure. So I quit school and was on a ski trip in New Hampshire with my father and my sister. And the snow was melting. And it was February. And it was terrible skiing. And I had all my ski gear with me. And so Steve, being a real adventurous soul, and me being 19 years old, he said to me, you know, we looked at a map and he said, look here, the Rockies, there, that's the gateway to the mountains, Denver.
Yeah.
So I said, wow, that's a good idea. I packed up, got a bus, and came to Denver. And in Denver, I got a job with the Rio Grande Railroad on bridge construction, because I already learned how to carpenter.
Engineering, yeah.
In Australia, I learned how to be a carpenter. And so in the meantime, I picked up this big Italian fellow, Chuck Coletti, on the way in Albany, who also had his skis with him when it was raining, and he was going somewhere to ski. And I said, don't go up to New Hampshire. It's no good up there. So in 5 minutes, he changed his tickets and came with me. And so he was my friend. And we came eventually to Aspen. We skied all the areas, and I discovered Aspen.
Well, you kind of describe yourself as a ski bum, but
Right.
I understand that you did buy some real estate early on.
Well, I was here a month,
A month.
and I was a bellhop in the Hotel Jerome, where I got a job with Mrs. Seibert.
Mm-hmm.
And she was hiring. Anyway, I came back and quit my job in Denver with the Rio Grande Railroad and came to Aspen to be a bellhop. And after being here a month, I said, this place is just unbelievable. It's paradise. It's so wonderful. And I could feel the start of something. You know, there was this undercurrent of something's going to happen here.
Mm-hmm.
It's not happening yet, but it's
Going to
going to.
Yeah.
And so within a month, I went out with a realtor who was Jimmy Moore.
I bought property from Jimmy Moore.
There you go.
Yeah.
He was still cutting hair.
Yeah, he was. Jimmy
Yeah,
Moore, yeah.
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 And he sold me 3 lots, but he showed me the wrong block. And I bought them anyway. and they were in the wrong block. But I went ahead and bought them, went back to New York, went back to school after the ski season, and I had earnest money on it, so I bought it sight unseen, really, because I was looking at another lot, which was in the block before. So I bought it anyway. I was going to buy a piece of land no matter what. So I did. I put all my savings on these 3 lots on block 31.
What foresight?
Yep.
You didn't know, but look what happened.
Well, I wanted to build something like, I was already a builder. I knew how to do it. And I decided, well, I'll come back and build a cabin, which is what I did.
Well, during all this time, you're either on the ski patrol at Aspen Mountain or teaching skiing. I understand you taught from 52 to 68, 1952, as a ski instructor here in the winters, and that was a priority at that time. Your father, did he come here? And he came here because I know Kurt Bresnitz told me he was here for 25 years. What did Steve do?
Well,
when he
you
came
know,
here,
he was
your
a
father?
manager. He was a manager in New York of a export firm, and things were going south because the owner was in a terrible divorce situation, and they wanted him to testify, and he didn't want to testify because it would have put his boss, if he was under oath, would have put his boss under a terrible situation. So he cut loose and came to Aspen, and at the time I arranged to run a little bed and breakfast, which was called Holiday House. And so he came to help me manage Holiday House. And he really was the resident at Holiday House, resident manager, while I was on the Aspen Ski Patrol. And we ran that for 2 years. And then it changed owners, and Fred Braun,
I knew Fred Braun,
who's
Mountain Rescue,
the great mountain rescue and cabin builder, took it over. He had bought it, but we ran it for him for 1 year while his family was in Europe. They were in Europe 1 year. And so we had a good start in the hotel business by that time.
Well, that's good. However, you're doing all the ski teaching and everything, and about that time, 1954, your time came up to go into the Army. How did you that happen? Just tell me if you got drafted or enlisted, or
I got drafted, and it was delayed by about a year. So I was a year older than most of the people who were coming in off that same draft. The reason I was delayed is because I'd broken my leg in the spring, and I wasn't very useful to the Army with a broken leg. So they put it off for a while, and they drafted me finally in '54. And as I said earlier, I went to Fort Ord and then came to Camp Hale. And in the summer, we were at Fort Carson. And I really wanted to be in the mountain troops. And I was very happy to be in Mountain and Cold Weather Training Command. It was a great, there were only 50, 60 of us in this group of instructors. We became instructors to teach mountaineering, cold weather survival, and skiing.
It's interesting that you were there. Peter Green was with you.
Peter Green came in. He was younger than I was, and he came in just about the time I was leaving. And when I came in, the Whitaker brothers were all ready to go back to school.
Yeah.
So
here's a picture here, Charlie. These are the Whitaker twins. Can you identify?
the tall guys.
Tall guys.
Yeah.
This is Jim Whitaker. He was the first American up Everest.
Right.
And he took me up Mount Rainier in August of 1954 as a guide on Mount Rainier. So I've known Jim and Lou for many years. And while you were there, there's a a magazine that I love. Kenny Moore subscribed to me. It's called Skiing Heritage. And in there, it's called 10th Mountain Redux, so looking back at the 10th mountain. It's a real nice story. And where are you here, Charlie? You're...
I'm on the right hand.
Right over here, Charlie, 10th Mountain.
If you're looking at the picture, left side.
Look at the picture. Here's Charlie with the skis. And this is post 10th Mountain Division, post World War II, but the training is still the same and going on. And you helped sponsor a reunion here, didn't you? Remember in Aspen of these guys?
No, that's another story.
That's another story?
Won't get into that. The fellow in the middle was Ralph Miller. Ralph Miller he was captain of the Dartmouth ski team.
Dartmouth, yeah.
Before he was an Olympic skier.
Oh, yeah.
And before he was drafted. And he went down to Chile one summer while he was in the Army. He was a good friend of mine. Mm-hmm. And he held a speed record of 109 miles an hour on a pair of skis.
Wow.
That he did that in Portillo. Mm-hmm. With Emile Allais, who was the coach.
Yeah.
And he did that with a pair of Northland skis and a T-shirt on, no helmet, nothing. And Peter Birkeland on the other side, on the right side, who became a professor at CU of, I think, geology. Mm-hmm. And we were taken up by Colonel Edlink up on this ridge above Camp Hale, and we were just doing skiing and taking pictures. And Colonel Link was having a great time with us, and we took that picture. That's when that came.
I knew Colonel Bob Link from my hometown, Enumclaw, Washington. When they started Crystal Mountain Ski Resort, he started it and ran it. So he was 10th Mountain Division from World War II.
That's right.
Then one other man that's mentioned in here is Sarge Brown, and he became a friend of mine later in his life, and we interviewed him for the Library of Congress. Sarge went with Pete Seibert and over there and Parker, and became the mountain manager at Vail, and really got Vail going. But that was after you had experience with Sarge Brown. And
well, anybody who ever had any experience with Sarge Brown. Sarge Brown was he was an Army man. He was a real Army man. And not only that, he was trying to get all these young guys in line. And everybody in our outfit, they were mostly college grads and a little above the cut, of the infantry guy. And they were always trying to put one over on him one way or another. And he would go in and if you didn't get up in time, he'd go and turn your bunk upside down and you ended up on the floor.
Real Army.
At Camp Hale, that would, we were in these hammocks, not hammocks, what do you call them? Folding cots.
Cots, cots.
With double sleeping bags.
Right.
Ice cold, was low, it was below zero at night. Mm-hmm. And it was hard to get up in the morning. And another thing, too, with Sergeant Brown, he would try to put some of us on KP. And we had all kind of ways to get out of that. I managed it my way. I was on the Camp Hale ski team with Pete Birkeland and Ralph Miller and other guys. And on weekends, we were supposed to, Colonel Woolley had us going to these meets, the college meets, and ski against the college guys at CU and DU. And we had these sweaters that said Camp Hale. It was good advertising. It was great promotion for Camp Hale.
Right.
And so Sergeant Brown couldn't put us on KP on weekends, and that really riled him. He never liked that. And with me especially, it seemed like he was after me all the time, because I would come home to Aspen on weekends, and he didn't like that. That was a little too special. It wasn't quite the tough situation.
Well, Sarge Brown was a career Army. He was up at Dartmouth and was an advisor to the Dartmouth Outing Club. And when Korea came, he landed in Pusan with the Marines, and then his Army outfit, and then he went over to Incheon and landed with the Marines, my old battalion, 3-5. Then they went up to the Chosin Reservoir and got trapped up there. Sarge was on the east side of the reservoir, and the Marines were on the west side. It was a terrible battle, and they got out, and they left the trucks, motor trucks running, the Army did, and Sarge said it was every man for himself, and he came across the ice on the Chosin Reservoir and joined the Marines and then came out. So I got a lot of his story from his whole military career, and you got part of it too.
Yeah.
Yeah, you did. Well, anyway, you're traveling around, you know, Vienna, Austria, Pilsen, Brisbane, United States. How did you become a U.S. citizen? When and where?
Well, it turned out to be in Glenwood Springs, of all places, in 1954. And, you know, I applied for citizenship, and they took me. I became a U.S. citizen. After all these other, I had become an Australian by adoption, from being an Austrian to being an Australian. Finally made it to be an American.
The four A's, Austria, Australia, America, Aspen. And we had many Europeans become citizens of the United States and living here. Was there anybody else that got naturalized with you that we might know?
There was Ellie Island,
Yeah.
Fred Island's wife. You know, everybody knew Ellie. She had a shop here, and she taught skiing for many years. And she became a citizen at the same time. So I did. I remember that. Yeah.
I remember that day. Yeah. Well, anyway, you got discharged from the Army in 56, and then you still had this land here in town that you'd held on to. And you were interested in engineering, and you'd build a hut or a cabin.
I built a cabin.
And then how did you get going into the lodging business? What happened there?
When I was at Holiday House, when we were running Holiday House, I built a log cabin. I felt on the property, and I put it over to one side. So when I came out of the Army, I talked one of my sergeants, who was Laszlo Su. He was an Estonian. I got him not to re-up and come up to Aspen and help me build 3 units. So right after the Army, I built these 3 units. And I got a loan from the local bank. And we got those built, and I started a lodge called the Boomerang with 3 units. And that was in the middle of the property of 9 lots. I had 3 lots. But before I built the cabin, I had bought the 3 lots on each side. So now I owned a half a block.
9 lots, yeah.
But I only increased my holdings on 3 lots. The others I kept empty. So then I started the Boomerang, and I ran that for a couple of years. Well, I was running it in the wintertime. But in 1957, I decided to go back to architecture. And I had an opportunity to go with Frank Lloyd Wright at his school at Taliesin in Wisconsin. And I'd applied there. And by chance, I'd come to Taliesin only by chance, like I came to Aspen by chance. I've been lucky all my life that way.
You really have. Well, my good friend Fritz Benedict, I worked for him for 5 years, and Fritz told me that he encouraged you to go to study with Frank Lloyd Wright in Wisconsin.
Fritz originally was one of the original people when they started the fellowship in 1932. And he was one of the original fellows. There were only a handful of them who built the fellowship. And then Fritz came in as a horticulturist, because he's very interested in plants, as you probably know. But he became a great architect. As you know, his buildings here resonate Frank Lloyd Wright work and principles.
Well, it seems like you structured your ski teaching. I see you taught all those years from 52 to 68, except the 2 years in the Army, and then you were going to Taliesin. How could you teach skiing and go to Taliesin? How'd you make that work?
That's a good question. That would come up. I made an agreement with Mr. Wright that I would come home every winter and teach skiing and run my little 3-unit lodge. I had to do that. And he agreed to that. Mm-hmm. And so I came back every summer when they were in Wisconsin. The winters they spent in Arizona. So in the summer, for 3 years, I was in Wisconsin at Taliesin. And when I was gone, I rented my 3 units for the whole summer. Mm-hmm. So I didn't have to run it as a lodge. But in the wintertime, I ran it as a lodge.
And teach skiing.
And teach skiing. So I was going, you know, like
every
this.
Which way.
So,
every which way. Well,
one of my, I might mention right here, one of my goals at Taliesin was to design a first-class lodge for myself for Aspen, which is exactly what I did in the 3 years I was there. Mm-hmm. I did all the working drawings, all the presentation drawings, in color, everything. After 3 years, I had that completed. So that gave me, you might say, the leg up to start my lodge. All I had to do was get some money.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll get to...
I need to mention that the GI Bill from my Army paid for my education at Taliesin. And it really, really was a great thing for me because I had no money. We lost all our money in Europe. Mm-hmm. And so it was a good way to begin. What
a life.
You know?
Fritz told me he had been at Taliesin West in Scottsdale and told me about how every year the fellows would come in and tear the place apart and design something. And you just told me the other day you just got back from Taliesin from a reunion.
That's right.
Was it Scottsdale?
Yes.
Or it was Scottsdale?
Yeah, Taliesin West.
What went on down there at the reunion?
Well, we have, every 5 years, for the last 25 years, we have a reunion of the alumni, of people who had been at Taliesin during the years. Mm-hmm. And everybody who was ever at Taliesin is invited to come. And so I've been going to each one of these since they started 25 years ago. Mm-hmm. And the first one, in fact, Fritz Benedict came with us.
Oh, he did? Fritz
came?
Yeah,
we talked him into coming with us. And he, as a matter of fact, we were walking along a rock wall, and he said, you know, this rock, I put this rock in this
Fritz
wall.
did, yeah.
Great big, yeah. Because they have these rock walls that were built in Taliesin. You've built a form, and you put rocks in, and you wired them up, and then you poured cement. And so the rock walls are with cement. They're really something that Mr. Wright started doing, and they're beautiful walls.
Now they built the waterfall house and up there on Castle Creek.
I don't know if they built it that way, though.
Maybe they didn't build. But anyway, Fritz, as you mentioned, was into horticulture and that, and I have his master's thesis at the University of Wisconsin. It was about a trail that went from his college all the way to Taliesin to Frank Lloyd Wright's place. And from that, Fritz got the idea of trails and the high route in France, which led to the 10th Mountain Hut hut system here. And of course, Fritz was a sergeant in the 10th Mountain Division in Europe, you know.
Right.
So you brought all of this heritage to Aspen that we're talking about today. Well, anyway, being from Australia, I wonder, did Boomerang have anything in your mind about naming the lodge, that the boomerang comes back, or
exactly.
Did it happen that way?
Well, we used it in our literature. We always said, where you are certain to return, the boomerang.
You're certain to return, yeah.
So this was for our guests to return like a boomerang.
Return like
which
a boomerang.
They did. We were very fortunate that we built a very good hotel or lodge, you might say. And our guest return, I made an awful lot of friends over the years.
Well, I still teach skiing for the Aspen Skiing Company, and the old timers tell me that you were one of the top instructors with the privates, and of course you had the lodge. You could take your clients skiing, and you were active in the PSIA, Rocky Mountain. Can you tell me a little bit about the Rocky Mountain Ski Instructors Association?
Well, here in Aspen, we started a small group of ski instructors. It wasn't a union, it was just an association. And when they made me president of that association of ski instructors here in Aspen, eventually then I was a representative to go to Rocky Mountain Ski Instructors Association. And after a couple of years of that, they wanted me to be president of that. So I don't know why. I certainly didn't ask for the jobs, but I was pretty well organized, and I could run meetings. And I was pretty good at that by that time. And so I did that for a couple of years, and then Rocky Mountain Ski Instructors was joined by the Southern Rocky Mountain Ski Instructors, and then my last year, we amalgamated with the new outfit, which was called PSIA.
I belong to that.
And now everybody belongs to that.
Yeah.
Professional Ski Instructors of America. We finally got all the divisions all over the country. There were dozens of them together to be under one umbrella. And so that started on my last year that I was president of Rocky Mountain Ski Instructors, 1958.
68.
58.
Yeah. Well, obviously, 58. You've been organized in your architecture work and your skiing work, and then in the business work you had in town. Didn't you have a lead in the business end of town here in the chamber?
Well, yeah.
Well, it's in the records. I looked it up.
Then, it was inevitable. I finally they asked me to be president of the Chamber of Commerce, and I did that. And then I was a member of the Aspen Aspen Resort Association, and that kept changing and evolving, and eventually the Resort Association and the Chamber became one. And at that time, there were separate organizations. And did that for a while, a couple of years. And about that time, 1958, 59, I was pretty busy with all this stuff.
Oh, understatement, Charlie.
I got married.
Yeah, we got married to Fonda.
That started to change the scenery quite a bit.
Yeah.
And my wonderful wife, Fonda, who we're still very happily married after 43 years, she had come to work for me. So history sort of repeats itself in funny ways. And within half a year or more, we married. She was such a great girl. So anyway, then she was fully employed all the time.
Fully employed, yeah. Well, then, things got you. How long did you stay with the Boomerang? You had what, 40 units there?
I ended up with 40 units.
Yeah.
Between 1960, when I came out of Taliesin in 1961, I had all the plans. I started building the main building, and it was an architectural inspiration from Frank Lloyd Wright, the battered block and the way the building became. And now it's, of course, it's declared historic, and it's still, that part is still standing, even though 2/3 have been torn down after I sold it in 2005. Anyway, your question was
well,
what again?
my question was, there's a certain parallel with Fritz Benedict, too, outside of the lodge. You're off building houses on Red Mountain and down there where I worked down in Basalt, the Waterman House, and that kept you busy too, didn't it? Doing architecture outside.
Between 1960 and 1980s, I did a lot of architecture. About 30–40% were built of what I designed. And I was pretty busy doing that as well as running the lodge. So actually I wasn't a ski instructor anymore, which was, thankfully, I had time to do all these other things then.
But I've seen you on the mountain as an ambassador.
That came later.
That came later.
After I retired.
After you retired.
I became an ambassador for 8 years.
For 8 years.
So we did that.
Well, you know, the whole purpose of this interview started out about the military, and of course you're part of it. And I just want to ask you a question, how the military influenced your life and how you've become so successful in managing your life to do all these positive things.
Well, you know, the military, there's definitely a certain discipline. And I like that. I like the discipline. I was always one for new ideas. And in a way I was a rebel, but I wasn't a rebel not to go along with whatever I was told to do.
Outside the box.
And that's, yeah, and really, I got along very well at Taliesin, at the fellowship also that way, because I was already used to adapting to different situations. And the discipline of the Army certainly gave me a leg up, again the word, to organize my life so I could accomplish these goals that I had set for myself.
Positive attitude. My father told me, he said, in life, he said, if you're going to be successful, you have to adapt to change. You certainly adapted to change in your life, Charlie. Now, to summarize this all up, I've looked through a gallery copy of a book that you're writing, and will be released shortly. It's called Escape Home is the title of the book. Could you tell us a little bit about that book?
Well, you know, when I sold the Boomerang, I retired, so to speak. And I was encouraged by a number of friends to start writing about my life, and a memoir, more or less, you might say. And I started on 5x7 cards that I felt I could shuffle around different parts of it. Well, soon enough, it was a notebook, and then the notebook grew, and then I had a good computer, and then I started writing everything on the computer. And so here I am writing all this stuff, you might say. But you know how your memory is. Your memory is not very good about what happened in the past 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. Well, I was very lucky. My father, Steve, kept every letter I ever wrote him. And we discovered this file of letters after his death in a filing cabinet, a stack of files this deep of every letter I ever wrote him, all the way back from 1939, when we were separated from that time in Czechoslovakia, in France, in Australia, in America when I came to Aspen. All these stories were all in the letters, everything that I was doing, because I used to write to him every week about everything, because we were very close. So these letters are really became the background, and you might say the spine of the book. And it gave me my memory back. I relived my entire life, almost. So then I was going along very well with the book. I'd gotten all the chapters done. And I talked my daughter, Carrie, who is now 40 years old. I talked her into becoming my editor for the book. And Hansley Paterson here in Aspen had encouraged me originally to write all this.
Mm-hmm.
So she was my other editor. So we had 2 editors. Carrie was such a good editor that she became my co-author. Mm-hmm. And she took some of the letters that I originally had used in the book and put them into text. So now Carrie is my co-author and was editor, chief editor. And the book has evolved into over 500 pages.
Oh my gosh.
38 chapters.
38 chapters.
7 years of work. And we hope to publish Escape Home in February and March. And we have our own publishing company that my daughter runs that's called Doppelhaus Press. Mm-hmm. We've already published 1 book on my Uncle Los, which was the first English edition of a book that my aunt had written about him and their life together. And so the first English edition of that book has been quite successful. We've sold probably close to 500 books. Mm-hmm. We only printed 1,000 books, so we're not doing too badly in 2 years.
No.
Anyway, they're in libraries and they're in colleges and they're in Europe. Europeans are very interested right now in Adolf Loos. There's a lot going on with Adolf Loos. Mm-hmm. So the other day I said to my daughter Carrie, I said, you know, a lot of people ask me, what is this book about? What are you writing? And I always say, well, you know, it's a historical memoir about my father and I and our life together. And that's really not enough. Mm-hmm. So she said, I've got an idea. I'll write out for you what I think the book is about. So if you'll allow me, I'll read it to you, what she wrote.
Please.
It's not very long, but
ahead,
it gives
sorry.
you the essence of what this book is about.
Wonderful.
And here is what she wrote as an editor. Escape Home is a memoir by architect Charles Paterson about the notion of home and rebuilding home after trauma and war. It connects movements in modern architecture in Central Europe through Adolf Loos, the author's uncle, with American modernism, specifically Frank Lloyd Wright, with whom the author studied, to American ideals of freedom and security. The author and the ancestors are from Vienna and Czechoslovakia and are part of the Jewish diaspora originating from the convulsion of World War II. Paralleling an autobiographical line with family history and biography, the book's central characters are the author and his stalwart, inventive, and visionary father, Steve Schanzer. Steve's escape through Nazi-occupied France while achieving the adoption of his children by the Paterson family in Australia is one of the most cinematic episodes. They were the only survivors of the Holocaust in their family. While the book traces journeys between Europe, Australia, New York, and finally Aspen, Colorado, along with Steve's foundational experience as a prisoner of war in Siberia during World War I, it comes to establish that when home and country are lost and identities shift, home is ultimately given meaning by family, familiar, foods, and traditions. One of these traditions is Gemütlichkeit, Austrian hospitality, expressed in the author's ski lodge he ran for 50 years, and alpine skiing, which threads through the book as representative of joy and Austrian heritage.
That's wonderful.
I think it's a nice...
You know, I think covered most of those things
We have.
in our
It's just
interview, and there they are.
sort of wraps
Well,
it up a little.
I'll be the first one in line to purchase an autographed copy of the book. I've
Thank you
looked
very
at the
much.
gallery already, and it really looks like a great book. Well, Charlie, we thank you so much for coming here today, and on behalf of the Roaring Fork Veterans History Project, I'd like to give you a support pin here.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
That is very nice.
Very good.
All right.
Very good. In closing, I'd like to mention that the Roaring Fork Veterans History Project exists to capture the personal stories of veterans of all wars, especially those veterans whose stories may soon be lost. To support this important community project, please contact Dick Merritt at 970-927-5178 or email merritt1@q.com. Thank you. Okay.